Welcome to Trauma Recovery Anonymous, the podcast. My name is Richard and I am your host. And I'm delighted to say that I have Patrick Elies on today. Patrick is a mental health professional and also a Christian psychologist. He deals in the world of addiction, depression and trauma. And he's also an expert when it comes to sex addiction. He deals in many different areas. I'm going to introduce you to Patrick now. Let him talk for himself, and I'll keep quiet. Patrick, very welcome.
Thanks, Richard. Appreciate being here tonight. Morning for you, but tonight for me. And looking forward to our conversation.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's jump into a couple of things. We spoke before about hope and offering hope to the lost, the disillusioned. And that's really my focus is if those who are lost, that the people who are diagnosed with disorders and they're stuck in this space of just brokenness and they can't see any way out, what kind of hope would you be able to offer in any way to these people?
Well, I think, one of the things I've often closed podcasts with is a line from a band called Switchfoot, and one of their lines in their song is "Every breath is a second chance." And I feel like that is a kind of a sort of a space for me that I always think about from a mental health perspective. I mean, I think every opportunity that you have to move forward, to make another decision, to take another breath, take another step is an opportunity. And so that's something that, if you have an opportunity to change, you have hope to be able to have something different in your life. That doesn't mean it's going to come quickly. For some people, it takes a long time sometimes to find and learn about themselves and be able to put themselves in a position where they can be able to, be consistent in those things. I think that's one of the big challenges is consistency. A lot of times we talk about it at least in the addiction space is, progress, not perfection, or in this case, excellence over perfection, which is consistency over time. And so if you have an opportunity to take another breath, you have an opportunity to make another decision, and you're not sort of boxed into a space where you have to make the same decisions you continue to make. A lot of times with addiction, it can feel like that, or a lot of times with other mental health issues or mental health challenges, or just life challenges, right? It can feel like sometimes we just get boxed into stuff. But we do have a malleable brain. We do have an ability to be able to make changes. And so therefore, the next choice we have to make can be something different than what we made before.
That's excellent. I'm going to use that myself. Every breath can be, brilliant, super. And I feel the same way. We only have this one life. And if we're focusing all our attention on our disorder and ignoring everything else, it seems like a terrible shame. I listened to a podcast, and the chap was saying that we each have approximately 80 years on this earth. And that at the end of the 80 years, it's all over. Whatever comes after, but what's on this earth is only for these 80 years. And if we're focused on depression or a past trauma and putting all our energy into that one thing and ignoring everything else, we're our own worst enemy. We look at around us, we have our husbands, our wives, our parents, our siblings, our children, our grandchildren, our hopes and dreams and aspirations, our hobbies, our interests. We have all this outside of it. And if we're allowing ourselves to be totally held captive, as a hostage to an event that happened in the past or a feeling, that's probably the worst thing we can do. And I love that idea of just a breath can change anything. In any moment, we can make a decision that, okay, for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to be happy, joyous, and free. And again, so your experience of working with people, and also I really want to bring God into this. I do believe that we don't talk enough about God, that God gets a bad name, that people who are in any way disenfranchised and disillusioned with the concept of God feel it's a bridge too far. I think most things people think that God is up in the clouds in an armchair waving his finger saying, you're a sinner, you're going to go to hell, and there's no way you can change. And I love the idea of telling people that God isn't in the clouds, he's actually inside you. And he wants you to be happy, joyous, and free in this moment. So like you suggested, in the next breath, just choose for 5 minutes to be happy, joyous, and free. Again, that kind of message, how would you carry that, Patrick?
Well, you're right about that. There's a lot of church hurt. People are wounded by their experiences in the church. Certainly, whether you have struggled with mental struggles or if you are just a person in cultural differences or even denominational differences, things like that. I think there's a lot of people experience church hurt in a lot of different ways. But I do think there's a separation between what people sort of as human beings, imperfect human beings, carry out the message of what the gospel is, the message of Christ. And so I think going back to, like you said, there's a lot of viewpoints that God is here to be a judge. God is here to, and there is a part of God that is absolutely, because he's a holy God. And I think that's something that people often miss, is that, his desire for us is to be holy. And so part of being holy is through the process of sanctification, which is really the ongoing, continuous, sort of understanding to be Christ-like, right? And so that's something that we're all, as believers, are all trying to work toward. And that's not a linear journey. A lot of times people, I feel like, once they kind of accept Christ in their life, they tend to sort of feel like it's going to be an uphill, continual, gradual growth. There's seasons there, just like there's seasons in everything with life. And so what some seasons might be a season of real growth and real depth with God, and then there might be seasons of dry. People talk a lot about the idea of the desert, the idea of the spiritual desert, being that you're far from God, or you don't feel God being close to you. And so I think those are those moments where you mentioned earlier, kind of faith being the tether that kind of continues to move us closer to that, is that even if we don't feel God, or maybe we don't see God, do we believe that he's still there working behind the scenes despite our inability to see those things? And so that's I think part of it is understanding God does have a plan for all of our lives. And that plan is a good plan. Now, we might not consider labeling it good or bad. We may label it the way we see it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that those things are going to collapse us, I guess would be a way of putting it. There's sometimes growth in sometimes the things that are very challenging, the pain, the suffering. But I think we have to understand that in order for us to be the best versions of closest to what we can in this earth anyway, of being Christ-like, we need some of those growth spaces and pains. And like how you said earlier, we can't sort of anchor ourselves just to the past. There's a tattoo. I knew somebody who had a tattoo years ago and said, how do I turn my wounds into wisdom? And I always like to kind of go back to that idea, is that, my wounds in my life, just like everybody's life, has to turn into some level of wisdom, meaning that either I learn from it or that I learn what not to do. So either I take what I could learn from it in the moment, or do I learn where not to put myself in those positions. And so as a clinician, one of the things I often have run into is mindset. People, if you focus, like you said, focus so much on what happened before, you don't allow yourself to grow in the present. And so a lot of people either future trip or past trip. And so when we future trip, we also create a lot of anxiety in that way. So believing that God does have a plan for us, I think, kind of going back to that idea, does come from a place of knowing that, our lives do have a purpose. And so again, going back to what we just talked about, like every breath is a second chance, in that our purpose is not over, until we no longer are here. And so God can use our stories, even if we don't think we can be used. And so I think I kind of go back to that as being a tether of what is our purpose and what is our direction and where are we going.
Oh, thank you. Lovely. I love the idea that I share with my clients, that prayer is powerful. The only thing we have that can change really in that moment is if we're in that terrible space of depression and despair, and we feel there's no way out, and there's no one we can turn to, and we're so caught up in the depression and despair that we've started keeping our lives a secret. We started keeping to ourselves how we really feel. We don't let people know how we really feel, and we're having this whole thing of behaving as though everything's fine when it's not fine. And we have to learn to break down that need to keep everything secret and to tell somebody, Patrick, I really feel depressed today. I feel like killing myself. What do you do in these situations if you ever feel this way? Or do you know anyone who ever felt this way? And what would they do? And then they say, well, I would go for a run or a swim. And then you copy them and you do what they did. And in that moment of going for a run or a swim, suddenly your whole sense of being changes, because you tried something different, something outside of your capacity to think. What I found for me, as I shared you earlier on, I was a lapsed Christian for many, many years, for about 40, 50 years, stuck in this denial and of this trauma that happened to me as a child. And I couldn't get past it. It was my whole world. And if anyone disagreed with me, or anyone tried to get me to just put up my socks and get on with life, I was furious at this rejecting my victimhood kind of stuff. And then I had this mentor said to me one day, He said, the time to stop flogging that dead horse. And I was furious, how dare you to knock my victimhood. But I wanted to keep this person in my life because they were a mentor. And so I kind of looked at that and I realized that I was investing all of my life in something that happened at the age of 12. And here I was at 50 years of age, giving all of my life in the present. I wasn't present to my parents, or my siblings, or my friends, or my work, because I was giving all my energy to something that happened to a child 40 years previously. And at the time, I'm a 52-year-old man. I'm not a 12-year-old child, so it didn't happen to me. So I had to find some way of getting out of the 12-year-old mindset and getting into my own life and as a 52-year-old man. And it was suggested to pray that at night time to give all my troubles to God and say, take all this crap from me for 8 hours and give me 8 hours of peaceful sleep. No nightmares, no flashbacks, no triggers. And let me sleep for 8 hours. And then in the morning I wake up and we see what happens. And so I tried this prayer, went to bed that night, no nightmares, no flashbacks, no triggers, just slept like a log. Woke up this morning thinking, that's my first miracle. I've just performed a miracle. I gave myself peace of mind for 8 hours. So the power of prayer, how do you use that in your practice? I'm asking.
Well, one of the things that I think, if you're working with somebody who's a believer, you certainly want to exercise, prayer at the beginning and end if that's something that they would like to have. I think it's important to pray for the sessions. Certainly something that I do. I need to do more regularly, but I do fairly often. And the fact that praying for whatever needs to be said, and I've talked about this in other ways that I think therapy, especially behind a door, is an opportunity. And so it's an opportunity for the person to share their life, but it's also an opportunity for them to reflect. It's an opportunity for me to maybe ask some questions. It's an opportunity for me to be able to be an ear. And I think when I started to change my perspective on how that works, as more of opportunity rather than necessarily as guidance or maybe as having the answer, stuff like that, it made me a better clinician because to the point of prayer is like, you're allowing opportunity for God to work. And it's not about necessarily having the right thing to say, so to speak. It's about being in the right heart posture, I think, in those moments. So, being open to the idea that like whatever I'm going to learn here might be difficult, but I'm willing to like you said, look at that, get myself out of the mindset of what I was before and focus on moving forward. From a prayer perspective, I think, like I said, it's really important to pray for those circumstances because I think God works in people's, works in words, works in people's hearts, works in people's minds to point people in the direction that they need to go, or at least align them, if they're with their hearts willing to do that. Where it's usually a struggle more so is when people are resistant to that. God can still work with people who are resistant, but he's not going to force you to do something that you don't want to do, right? He wants somebody who's willing to put their free will in that position. So I think a lot of, how would I utilize, continue to utilize prayer is really about helping the person and their heart posture in those moments in that way. So hopefully that answers what you're part of that question.
Yeah, I think it does. I'm what am I trying to say here? I love it that in your profile, you say you're a clinical clinician, but also a Christian counselor. And I can recall a book. Did you ever hear of Norman Vincent Peale?
I believe so, yes. Yep.
He was a Christian therapist back in the 1900s, and he got together and he wrote a book with a guy called against Eric Blankton. I probably got the name wrong, but Fate is the Answer. And basically, he was a psychologist, and Norman was a Christian counselor. And what they do was, when someone came into the office with disorder or some stuff, they speak to the mental health person first, and then he pass them on to Norman. Norman teach them all about forgiveness and love and empathy and kindness and all that kind of stuff. And they found in many cases, when people embraced the Christian therapy over the mental health professional therapy, it was a huge success, that people were able to just get back to their lives, back into the order, rather than going to the place of victimhood. And for you, holding both seats, both hats, wearing both hats, you're like Norman Vincent Peale and this other guy, Eric Blankton, together at one. How does that work for you in your practice when you're working with somebody that you can combine or interweave both practices together?
Yeah, I've always seen like the theology piece of my work or the therapy part of it, again, is kind of an extension of what we do. And so it depends on the person really kind of where they want to be as far as how deep they'd like it to go. I certainly think that there's people who have been more open to the idea of not only prayer, but just talking about how does theology, or how does their Christ, not the Christ, how does their walk with Christ, I guess would be a way of saying it, interact with their own mental health. For some folks, there is a pretty big distinction as far as, their mental health is their mental health, and so their spiritual life is their spiritual life. I do think that, like you're saying, I do agree that they cross over and they do have a lot of implications together. But one of the things I think with the mental health side of it is there are some things that you can do to physically help yourself and help physically work on your mental health. And then there's the spiritual part of it, and how far deep are you willing to go on that part of it? And that's where people are a little more, I think, I don't use the word skeptical, but I think they're a little more resistant to the idea that they are working toward that depth. For a lot of folks, it's about kind of feeling better in the moment, not necessarily about getting better over a longer term, which is one of the differences about in different places you work at. I mean, in kind of a general practitioner space, which is what I'm in right now, and what most of my career has been, you're really kind of helping people in really short-term stuff. So, it might be, 6 months, 6 weeks, something like that, in that range, right? You're not doing a lot of like deeper stuff. But when you're working like an addiction space, that could be, the addiction program I was part of was 3 to 5 years long. So you're going to be dealing with a lot more of those kind of things coming up, I think, and a lot of addiction material is really embedded with some spiritual formation. So I think it's important, depending on the distinction of what you're working with, that also comes into play too. So again, going back to like a addiction perspective, overcoming addiction has a lot to do with your spiritual direction. Do you have a higher power? In this case, higher power, but also in this case of Christianity, do you find God in your lack of, is that the addiction trying to kind of fill that God-shaped hole, if that makes sense? And so key people will often use that language to help people find that anchor of their faith and to improve in their faith in that way.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned addiction. I'm not saying that's my field. That's where I came from. I was addicted to alcohol and gambling and some other behaviors too. And I came through 12-step recovery. I'm 38 years sober this year, and the big part of recovery is it's a spiritual solution. That's where you have to really embrace is the fact that I like to call it a hole in our soul, the God hole that's missing in our lives. And if we treat just the physical side of the body, we're neglecting the mental, emotional, and spiritual. If we treat the mental, we're neglecting then the physical and the emotional and so on. But if we treat the spiritual, everything else gets healed as well. If you can treat the spirit and empower your spirit to love life, then from out of loving life and having self-acceptance and self-worth, suddenly your thinking changes. Your thinking changes, your feeling changes, and suddenly then you start taking actions. So the goal for me is to teach people, if you can heal your soul, the hole in your soul, mend your broken spirit by letting go of the past and focusing on living just in these 24 hours, suddenly everything else changes. But if we focus just on the mental side of it and just the maybe medication and therapy, and we ignore the physical, the emotion, whatever, we can end up burning out, or we can get some physical ailment or some emotional distort in our lives. And if we're not feeding the spirit, our soul dies, our will to live, our desire to change and have life can die. So for me, it's a case of really want my audience, my clients, to understand we need to treat the soul first and foremost. And I said that thing about the church hurt. There is a lot of church hurt. And there's a lot of conflict between denominations and who thinks they're right, who thinks they're wrong, and rules that man made. You must do this to be in God's eyes. But Jesus said, come ye as little children. You're good enough as you are. Just make an effort to decide today. Forget whether the egg or the chicken came first and decide, okay, there is a God. He cares about me, but to have him in my life, I have to have him on his terms, not on my terms. He can no longer be a go-get-you God I call to when I'm having a bad day and then ignore him the rest of my time when everything's fine. I have to have a personal relationship with him every day and talk to him every day. And it can be, God, you dirty fecker, to let this happen to me. Or, God, thank you for this thing. It's okay to curse at God. He doesn't care. He wants a conversation with you. It's okay to talk to him. Whatever, like you're talking to your best friend and he hits on your girlfriend, you kind of go, you dirty fucking idiot. But you're still underneath that, you're the best friends and you'll work through it. But it's okay to be angry, sad, mad, glad, depressed, anxious. It's okay to have these feelings.
Yeah, one I'd add to some of the things you just talked about is shame, right? That shame is a big part of people's experiences and going back to their identity and kind of shame affecting the soul. I think because in the space of addiction, but also in the space of anything that we do that we kind of attach identity to, tends to be things that end up draining the soul or draining the spirit in that way of ourselves. So I think shame, when you talk about like the identity of shame, so the difference is your guilt is I did something wrong. Shame is I am something wrong in that way. And so I think that's something that definitely is or maybe misunderstood. I said probably misunderstood in the church, because there's a lot of shame that you talk about. There's a lot of shame that people hold on to their identity. Whether or not how long they've been a believer, they have their believer identity and then they have their sin identity, and their sin identity is really wrapped in shame. And so if you listen to both of those, are conflicting voices. And so you really are not listening to the main voice. You're listening to these conflicting voices. And so there's more the more noise we have, the more distractions we have, the more things that keep us from focusing on the one true voice, the more likelihood that we're going to continue to have behaviors that we don't want to do. So kind of going back to the idea is identifying your shame voice, and knowing, how is that keeping me in the past? Not if it is, it probably is for sure. How is it keeping me there? So kind of something along those lines too.
Brilliant. I'm glad you brought up shame. I believe that the shame manifests in our thinking, our feeling, but the shame is a soul sickness. And that's why we have to introduce our clients to some form of God. And again, we have to heal that hole in our soul. And shame is a terrible thing. Shame can keep us we can be great servants to everybody else, but feel as though we're not worth life. That we'll do everything for everybody else, but we'll just, because we're so ashamed of what we've done and what we've become or what we allowed happen to us, that we're broken now and we can never be whole again. But we'll be service to everybody else, and this codependency where we fix everybody else and we look for them to give us our approval or their permission, but we have no sense of self-worth. So I think shame is a very important tact. I'm glad you brought it up. It's something we really have to focus on, is if you can deal with your shame and understand. I like to tell my clients that we're all children of God. We're perfect just as we are, with all our defects and shortcomings, all our doubts and insecurities. Others can do what we can do, but no one can do what we can do with our energy that makes us so unique and so special. And God has never made a mistake in his life. He's not starting with us. And understand that the shame is a part of your past, but if you can find some way to let go of your past and focus on being in the present, the I am moment, then you can learn to have self-worth and self-esteem and self-courage and confidence to go on and have a life today. Stop looking at that thing that happened in the past, yesterday, or in my case, 50 years ago now. I'm 64 today. But to just let that go and focus on being a 64-year-old man today, a husband and a father, a podcast host, a podcast guest, a therapist, a counselor, whatever it is, just live in this moment and find your life in this moment. And let the past, the Bible says, let the dead bury the dead. It's a really profound, but really serious, truthful statement. The past is not ours to suffer it. Let go of it.
Yeah, and we're only guaranteed what we have right this second, and it goes back to every breath is a second chance. I mean, you have a different direction you can start in, but it starts with, like you said, burying the past and burying the fact that these things don't identify the person moving forward. And I think what ends up happening for some folks is that there is, like you said earlier, there's a lot of positive affirmation people get out of victim mentality and focusing on things that are of the past, or believing that they have to pay a price or a penalty for what's happened. That's another big one I've heard a lot too. And sometimes there's things that we're hurt by other people. Hurt people hurt more people. That's very common, and we're all hurt people some way. So I think when you think about in those contexts, there's things that have happened to all of us that are part of sin. That's part of the fall of man. And so not to erase the pain for people, but certainly if we don't find ways to acknowledge and be able to move forward, then we're going to be listening to those multiple voices again, and we're going to listen to probably the ones that are louder, and usually the pain is louder than the promise in that way.
I like the idea of the voices. I believe we've got two sets of voices. The first voice is the voices of the ego, the conscious mind, connected to this fallen world. They control us. They keep us in conflict with ourselves, the world around us, and their job is to keep us ever from having a relationship with God. So it's in the head saying to you, "Don't listen to this fool. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know your story." The voice is going on in your head right now. But then the other voices are the voices of our subconscious minds, God's given instincts, our gut feelings, telling us to take action, flight, fight, freeze, fate, fawn, or acceptance. Take some from action. Don't keep secrets. When you're having a bad day, tell somebody you're having a bad day. Don't keep it yourself. Don't just keep it for your therapist, but take a chance with family. Blood is thicker than water. Give someone in your family an opportunity to be there for you. Say to your mum or your dad or your brother or your sister, I feel depressed. I feel suicidal. I feel dejected. I feel like drinking again. I feel like drugging again. I feel like jumping off the cliff. What do you do when you feel this way? And then they say, well, I do this, and you copy what they do. And if it works for you, you're building up an arsenal of healthy coping skills. If it doesn't work for you, try something else and keep asking somebody else and build up that whole arsenal. So, yeah, I love the idea of taking some from action, understanding not to listen to the wrong voices, as you said. Voices are the problem. If I listen to the voices of the ego saying, you're no good, you'll never be any good, you're broken, no one will love you, we're screwed, because that just leads us darker into that deep, dark hole. But if we can understand that our instincts are from God, saying us, take some action, walk away, simply walk away. Just don't make excuses, don't apologize. Just get up and leave the conversation, leave the relationship, leave the room, leave this classroom, leave your job or the house or the building or your bedroom. Just get up and walk out. If you're in the bedroom and your head's going crazy, get up and go for a walk, go for a run, do some house chores, do some homework, talk to your family, play a board game. Just get out of yourself in that moment. And if that worked for you, kind of go, okay, that's my healthy coping skill.
Yeah, finding what works for people, I think, is really important. Finding out what you know works for you from a perspective of what you're interested in. A lot of times, if you take skills and things that you don't have that you find that are not super helpful, those are the ones that usually don't have anything connected back to you. So I always try to work with what people know and what people, like if I always try to make all my metaphors fit for what people know and whoever I'm talking to, kind of fit to your audience in that way, I guess. But I'd also say kind of along the lines of what you're saying with the voices, the one side of the voice is the flesh, right? So there's the aspect of, like you said, sort of the temptation voices of, hey, don't listen to these people, don't just keep things hidden, do whatever you want to do, those kind of things. And then I think there's another part of it. One of my mentors used to share about the idea of the imago Dei, which is this idea that we have the imprint of God. And so the imprint of God in ourselves is sort of those things of, the desire to have wholeness from, a greater being and to be able to be connected to God in a spiritual way and those kind of things. And so that's kind of along the lines of what you're saying, like, those two different sides of the voices, two different sides of the coin, are the flesh versus the spirit. And so, if you've accepted Christ into your life and you're following him, you're going to have those voices be pretty loud. And the more we do things that are outside of what God wants us to do, I think the quieter that voice gets. The spirit's not going to yell at us if we're not willing to, again, back to what we said earlier, not willing to put myself in a posture of listening. And so that's kind of back to some ideas, like we can sear our hearts in that way, so that if we don't continue to try to work toward healthier behavior, we're gonna continue to put ourselves in bad spots. So I think that's where the renewing of the mind comes into play.
Patrick, we're coming to the end of our chat. I have to ask you. I understand you're a pastor and you're a Christian counselor, but I want to ask you if you're reaching out to somebody like in my audience who has no understanding of God or has turned his back completely on God, the idea of allowing God to be a part of the solution is like not possible in their eyes. And you were to offer them some idea of hope that it's okay to be like a new Christian who doesn't know the Bible and doesn't know all the rules, that just to allow Jesus into your life. What could you say to them to say, just try this today, just for today? You don't have to be a denomination or a bona fide Christian, but just to let God into your life for today. Try this.
Well, I go back to what you said earlier about prayer. I mean, I think prayer is a big, praying to God, being honest where you're at, surrendering your what you're, trying to, or maybe asking in that way, what does God's will for your life look like, as far as, turning yourself and turning your posture to listening to God and hearing what he might have to say for your life. Can understand that, people would be maybe hesitant to that idea, but I think, you have to experience. The other thing I would say too is going out into nature and experiencing God's creation, because I think that's a big part of understanding that God is. You mentioned kind of earlier, God's around all. God's design is around all of us, and certainly that aspect of nature is one of those things. Finding where you most connect with God, that can definitely be outside in in that way. So I think doing some of those things to put yourself in positions of acceptance and even getting on your knees. And if it's just in the bedroom alone, whatever, get on your knees and just, opening your arms up and just being willing to put yourself in a position of humility will I think, open to finding where you want to go as far as, listening to God and hearing what God has to say.
Brilliant. I love that imprint of God. So basically, if you're new to this whole thing and you've been in mental disorder for a long, long time and you're looking for some way of changing it, I think, unfortunately, people have been in it so long, they feel stuck and there's no other way out. So it's okay for you to claim your miracle. You can go to God and say, okay, God, I've tried this way, it's not working, but I've no other way out. And I listened to Patrick and to Richard. I like the idea that I can invite you into my life today. So here's a pen and paper. Here's a list of all the things that really frustrate me and irritate me and annoy me and rob me of my peace. I'm going to give this list to you now. Please give me 8 hours of sleep. And read out your list aloud and then burn it and flush down the toilet and climb into bed. That can be your prayer. Your prayer can be a case of just, God, save me. God, give me peace of mind for 5 minutes. Don't be afraid that your prayer isn't good enough. It's coming from your heart. And when it's coming from your heart, you activate your soul. And whatever your prayer is to God, I'm having a horrible time, God, get me through this. That's your prayer. You're starting a personal conversation with him. That's good enough. That's all he wants of you. He doesn't have you to go to stand on a soapbox in a corner and preach to the world. Just come to him privately. I mean, your family may be all from the woke community or atheists or agnostics. In secret, just say to him in this moment, God, just listen to Patrick and to Richard, and I've got a glimmer of hope in my heart. And so I'm going to ask you, give me eight minutes of peace of mind. I'm going to go and lay down for 8 minutes, clear my mind of all my madness, that I can just have peace for 8 minutes. Thank you. And then imagine he's heard you and go and lay down for 8 minutes and see what happens. And if you have nightmares for 8 minutes, then you know he's not there. But if it turns out you get peace of mind for 8 minutes, you know you've been heard. Just take a chance on it. There's nothing to lose by asking him to give you 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It's okay. Patrick, how can people get in touch with you?
So a good way to, LinkedIn. So Patrick Eilers, MALPC is my LinkedIn. Find me on there. Email for my business is bloomworkscc@gmx.com. I also have a Patreon channel, patreon.com/bloomworks. So you can find all the podcasts and stuff I do on there. Those are probably the best ways to get in touch with me.
And you are a podcaster?
No, I don't do any of my own podcasting. I'm on a lot of other people's podcasts, though.
Fantastic! I can understand why. But I got word from my from social media that my followers have gone from 2,000 to 11,000. So if my 11,000 followers are out there, please do me a favor, flock to Patrick's banner and support him, because I think he has a great message for all of us. I love that idea of the imprint of God. And God isn't that hard to get to. All we have to do is make a decision. On our side, he'll come to us, but we have to change our way. Patrick, anything to finish off you can share with my audience that can help them in some way?
Well, I go back to, I guess, one thing earlier you mentioned, kind of, how do you start changing? And I think you start changing by, you said surrendering is one aspect, and being open to what God's going to do and asking him for that strength. But the other thing is continuing to know that if you put boundaries in your life around things that you find valuable, so boundaries around behaviors that you don't want to do anymore, and discovering kind of what things you're going to go toward. Kind of mapping out that vision, so to speak, and allowing God to be the center of that. I think those things will start to help change behavior. A lot of times when I've worked with different behavior situations, a lot of it comes down to establishing good boundaries and having a good vision. If you have both of those things, usually that really starts to gain some momentum. It's where people lose sight of those things. I think is really where they tend to struggle with relapsing and that kind of thing. So kind of back to the idea of every breath is a second chance, is that, if every breath is a second chance, it's about mindset shift, and that, there's going to be times where you may not be perfect at it. And that's where it goes back to excellence. Living in excellence is about, being consistent over a period of time, not running the race perfectly, but running the race with greater, healthier steps than with unhealthier steps. So it's part of that is, I think, a journey of finding that consistency. And again, that comes also with prayer, asking God to help you be consistent in the behavior that you want to turn toward.
Last thing, you mentioned setting boundaries. Can you explain that in very simple terms for my audience about setting boundaries around?
Yeah, so one of the examples I used to give quite a bit is when I used to work with sexual addiction, is that, right, the phone goes to places, and we have an intimacy with our phone that is something that you've never seen. There's no other device that we have an intimacy with like the phone. So I used to tell people all the time, like, the phone can't go certain places. The phone doesn't go to the bathroom. Phone doesn't go to the bedroom. Those are two places where you have opportunity to act out and to watch pornography. So that's specifically that one. But, sort of a boundary would be just understanding that the phone can't go those places. Make sure the phone is outside of those places. The phone sits in the living room, in the kitchen, wherever. It just doesn't go into those places with people. So that's a boundary example in that way.
That's fantastic. Okay, so yeah, I think we all live in our phones. We have all these massive numbers of friends on our phone, but when it comes to real life, we've got nobody outside. Yeah, so I think that's the big one for all of us is the phone. We have to find ways of putting down the phone for an hour here, an hour there. I used to leave my phone charged at night, and my wife said, turn your phone off. Just turn it off. You don't have it. You need to have it on at night. You got a call at 4 a.m. They can phone you at 9 a.m. Just turn your phone off. Don't keep on your phone. So at a certain time, 10 p.m. at night, phone goes off. And then at 9 o'clock in the morning.
That's a boundary. Yep. At 10 o'clock at night can be about, you can make a time boundary. You can make a physical location boundary. One of the reasons I say that is because the phone does have an intimacy, and kind of going back to the spiritual life, you can't serve two masters. So if you're going to focus on the phone, you're going to lose some time with God, and eventually you'll be on your phone more than you'll be with the Lord. So I think that's just an idea of make sure as a boundary in that particular example, utilizing those and making sure you break the intimacy from things that are not worth your time, not worth the things that are going to make you have deeper relationships.
Patrick, you're brilliant. I'm thinking that topic on its own, the phone and how we can set boundaries around it, is a whole topic on its own. I think for many of us, if we could put down a phone for a day, I think we'd probably go into terrible withdrawal. But with the freedom and the lack of, we take so much crazy stuff from social media on our phones. We just soak it all up.
Yep.
All this negativity in the world, we're soaking it all up and we're putting it in upon ourselves. If we could just put a phone down, I mean, even the idea of that for me is like alien. I couldn't put my phone down for the whole day. I need to check in with this, that, and the other. But if we could learn to say, okay, no phone during meal times. No phone after 10 p.m. at night. No phone in the bedroom. But leave the phone charged downstairs or something. No phone in the bathroom, you said. Definitely no phone in the bathroom. No phone maybe in school. Put the phone in the bag. Turn the phone off when you're in school. Turn the phone off when you're in your job. You're meant to be working. You're meant to be schooling. So no phone on that you can look at. Don't say you're using your phone for your calculator or for your computer. Turn your phone off. End of story. Ask your teacher for this kind of stuff. There's a whole area there that would help us greatly in our well-being. If we could just, again, change our God from being the phone to being the idea of peace of mind. Patrick, thank you very much for coming onto my podcast. Really a pleasure to have you. I hope I'll have you again. Everybody, this is Patrick Elies. Please reach out to him. I'll leave all his links in the description when I post this, and feel free to reach out to him.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Richard. It was a great conversation. Definitely be back on. If you want me to be back on, I'd be happy to be.
Patrick, thank you very much for coming on.